Okay, afternoon everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar for the Guardian QGD-3014. As always, with our webinars, the full session will be posted to our QUK YouTube channel, where you can find all of our previous webinars, as well as shorter product release videos and any in-depth application tutorials that we post. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel and feel free to leave us any questions or comments on the videos. Even the older ones are monitored, so we do get back to you and answer any questions. We're always listening to subscribers with regards to suggestions for future videos as well. So if there's something you want to see in more detail, then definitely leave it in a comment there and we will pick it up. And for today, if you've got any questions as we're going along, please check them in the chat window as they occur to you, and we'll try and answer whilst on topic rather than all in a row at the end of the session. I'll just say at this point that I'm speaking for the first sort of 10 minutes or so, and Craig is controlling the slides in the background. So if we do have to pause or go back, then apologies for that, but hopefully it will run nice and smoothly. So, agenda for today is pretty simple. I'll take you through a brief overview of the 3014, including highlighting the differences to previous Guardian units, a couple of use cases that make sense for us, and then I'll hand over to Craig for some live demos of the product in more detail. So, for those of you not familiar with the Guardian range, this slide just shows what we feel is the evolution of PoE switching, from the entry-level unmanaged switch that just provides power and network connectivity to the devices, through to a layer 2 or 3 managed switch that allows for functions like VLANs or port trunking, and then onto a smart edge PoE switch, which for us means adding a whole host of network features alongside a NAS host that provides storage and support for VM applications. And this range of products is what we call our Guardians. So here you can see the new unit side by side with the existing Guardian range. Within the feedback for the original units were lots of requests for a desktop model, perhaps one that would look less out of place in a pop-up shop or small office environment where it might be on show, something that doesn't need a rack cabinet basically. And the most frequent request we had was for a unit that provided more initial onboard storage than the 2.5 inch drive bays that came with the 1600 and the 1602. And you can see that's exactly what we have done. The 3014 comes in a desktop form factor with 4 onboard 3.5 inch drive bays. Those drive bays are currently compatible with up to 16 terabyte hard drives, which will give you nearly 50 terabyte of usable capacity, even when rated. The new unit provides the same great connection options, and now additionally has the potential to upgrade performance in the future by adding M2 SSDs, which you didn't have before. Okay, next slide. So this is the unit, a little bit more up close and in detail. You can see straight away that it definitely stands apart from the previous units. It's a lot more aesthetically pleasing, and it's not going to stick out like an eyesore if it does end up being installed where people can see it. The drive bays are hidden by that honeycomb textured screen on the left-hand side. Those drive bays are actually metal trays, which is pretty rare on our NAS units now, but for this unit it allows for a more efficient temperature dissipation. And that ties nicely into the unit's sort of quiet cooling ethos. Again, you don't want to hear fans whirring away while it's sat on a desk next to you. But you can see on the right hand side there's the standard QNAP array of LED system lights. As this unit is a NAS and a switch combined, there's probably more lights there than you'd normally see, but they are split and titled accordingly. So one bank for the host and one bank for the switch. And that, coupled with the large LCD screen, gives you a greater understanding of the system status without necessarily having to log into the OS to troubleshoot. If you've got a drive down or something, you can see it there on the screen. And then moving on to the back of the unit, you can immediately see that large fan on the right hand side. So the bigger the fan, the slower it needs to turn to create the airflow, and that means it's going to be nice and quiet. The next most dominant feature on the back there is the 16 PoE plus ports. Each one of those ports can provide 30 watts of PoE power, and we have a max output of 140 watt for the unit overall. So it's worth noting here that versus the 1602 or the 1600, the 3014 does not have the 4 PoE plus ports for really big PoE devices such as digital display screens or menu screens you might get in a restaurant, something like that. And straight away, therefore, you know that this unit's more going to be aimed at IP surveillance, so your IP cameras or VoIP phones, Wi-Fi access points, things like that. Multiple devices that draw less power, basically. You can see next to the audio buttons on the ports on the top left, we've still got the 2 reset buttons, one for the host and one for the switch. so you can independently reboot each system. So if you need to upgrade the software or firmware on the NAS, you don't need to turn your switch off, and vice versa. If you've got a problem with the switch, you're not going to have to turn down all your VMs or anything that you've got running on the NAS. With 2 HDMI outputs and USB ports, so you can still locally view your camera footage if you want to connect to a monitor that way, or if you want to run a virtual machine like a Windows VM off the NAS side, you can connect mice, keyboards, and input that way, same as you would on the NAS. Okay, next slide. So those smaller PoE ports, so straight away with the extra capacity of this unit, they're really going to endear itself as an IP MVR solution. And when we utilize some of the NAS features alongside the PoE switch, we're going to be able to overcome some of the difficulties or problems you might have with a traditional MVR solution. So whereas traditional MVR vendors might lock you into their cameras, we don't have that issue. We've got up to 5,000 cameras on our compatibility list that you can check at the moment. Another problem with normal MVR solution is that they tend to struggle with poor performance when used on a video wall display. Our unit here has an onboard GPU to take care of that. The GPU can do other stuff as well, like de-warping fisheye cameras, but really it's just there to make sure there's a really smooth video playback when you need it. MVR solutions as well typically only have 1 or 2 internal drives, which means little or no RAID protection or not a large amount of storage. And even if there is a RAID protection, then with 2 drives, you're going to get a max of something like RAID 1, which is going to give you a poor cost to storage ratio. Again, the 3014 has an advantage here because of the 4 drive bays. We can set up RAID 5 and still provide a big chunk of storage. The Guardian allows you to manage your surveillance system, footage, and network all in one place, which means managing multiple sites and their backup is a very simple process. And the Guardian is also much more secure than traditional MVR solutions with fully encrypted backups and remote management all under your firewall protection if you need to. So if we go on to the next slide and do a side-by-side comparison, if you see a typical IP surveillance setup on the left there versus ours on the right, the Guardian is going to be much more simple and efficient. On the left, the traditional setup would be to connect to the internet via your router, then use a managed switch to connect to the cameras, then separately connect to an MVR and then output to your monitor. With the Guardian on the right, all of those appliances come under one unit. So we have the router, the surveillance software, the storage for your surveillance, the PoE switch for your cameras. That's all in one unit. And that's obviously going to save you costs in the initial setup by having to purchase less equipment, but doubly so in the long run. You've got less kit to maintain or replace, less kit to learn, and then even further in the future, if you want to expand that solution, it's easy to do that as well, which we can see on the next slide. So more and more we find with IP surveillance installations that the requirement is to run over multiple sites, and the simplicity of deployment that you get with the Guardian and that it's compatible with our SD-WAN solution QuWAN makes it the perfect solution for a multi-site setup. You can have a Guardian at each site connected over the QuWAN, backing up to one another, or to a central site running QVR Center where you could view and look after all the footage in one place. Craig's going to do a bit of demo on QuWAN in a minute, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically the idea behind using QuWAN there is that all of your camera footage is behind the same intranet and therefore protected by the same firewalls and nice and safe and secure. So the other main benefit, aside from having onboard storage, of using a NAS and a switch combined for this kind of solution means that you can run VMs. As an example, you could run a VM to run your virtual routers from the NAS, or manage your Wi-Fi, or again, your firewall software, or even run things like your door lock system via containers. We're compatible with pfSense firewall software is a really good example of this. And again, that's going to be something Craig's going to demo for us in a second. So just before I hand over to Craig, we're going to we've just got a couple of use cases of the Guardian where we think it fits, or what sort of products you might attach to it. So in a small office environment or SMB environment, the Guardian can basically become almost all of the infrastructure you need. Not only can the Guardian manage your PoE surveillance and Wi-Fi access points, but any other network device that you might have in a small office, such as printers, phones, door locks, meeting room displays, anything like that. And then through our virtual switch software, you can also run the scheduling of your PoE devices to decide when certain cameras turn on, or when, say, certain workstations can draw the most power. And you can also do this remotely via Wake on LAN. And then the host side of the Guardian is storing the daily data created by the people in the office, data which then can be backed up to a central NAS at the end of the day, or if you're a satellite office. And if you're not a satellite office, if it's a smaller office environment and just a smaller company, then the increased storage capacity on the 3014 means that you could probably run that for quite a long time before 50 terabytes worth of Word documents is taken up, right? And even when that is, even when you have used all the space on the Guardian and using onboard apps like hybrid mount, things like that, that can then be archived to the cloud as you wish. So next one. So similarly, in a retail environment, obviously things like surveillance and Wi-Fi AP management is just as applicable, but a whole different set of PoE devices comes to the fore as well. So instead of talking about VoIP phones in this environment or printers, the Guardian can manage your point of sale display devices or electronic menus, media players, things like that. And then again, on the host side becomes important here. You can manage the data that those digital signage screens need, rather than having a separate media player or something like that. But also it saves the data that your POS devices is creating. Your really important customer data is saved securely locally. And then again, at the end of the day, that can be bounced off to HQ over the internet, or even better, using QuWAN again over your encrypted intranet. So that was everything from me. Pretty quick overview of the unit. So we'll pass over to Craig and see some of it in action.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Tom. So I'll start off just by answering a couple of questions that have come in already. So I've got one from Geo asking about if M.2 slots are also in the other Guardians as well. You're right, the QGD-1602 does have it. And you've also asked if they will support creating a volume or not. Yes, you can use them as a volume directly. You can have them as a cache, a volume alongside a volume on the hard disks. However you want to set it up, you can configure it that way. You did also ask a question if it works with the QM2 SATA cards. Not sure on that one. I'll have to come back to you at the end. I'll have a look around when I'm not sharing my screen. So what you're looking at here is the very first screen you'll see after you set up the QNAP Guardian. So this is the QGD-3014-16PT, so 16 ports as part of the switch. And then it's got a couple of extra ports specifically for the hosts. So what I'm showing you here is largely the host. I've tried to set up an environment here that would be largely like something that you would have in a remote office scenario, perhaps a small retail. So with this unit, I've got quite a lot of things running on it. You can sort of get a clue from the title bar there along the top of the different things that I do have open on this unit. Everything you're about to see is hosted directly on this one Guardian unit. I haven't got this hosted on other things. Everything's running inside here. I've got it set up. It's been running for a while. One of the things I've got running is it's been the router for my household now for a couple of weeks. Absolutely rock solid, fantastic bit of kit there for that type of setup as well. So hopefully if you were planning to use something like this for a remote office, it would work just as well for that. So a couple of things that I've got running on this particular unit. We'll go and have a look at the switching setup first of all. Now you can connect to the switch directly if you want to. It does come up in the QFinder application in both ways. So if I slide that in, you can see here that you've got two entries for the QGD-3014-16PT. One is the edge switch, one is the switch. So the edge switch would be the NAS part itself, and the switch side of things would be directly into the switch. But what you can do is you can actually just open up the switch interface directly from the NAS host interface. There's two internal links between the two, so you can access that. So down here, we've got an app called QNET Switch. So if you open that up, it pulls up the switch interface. So everything in here is to do with the switch itself and not the NAS. So all the different functions and features. So we can see here that the switch, I've got a couple of things with the yellow icons there next to the ports. So they're things I'm powering with PoE. Down here, we can see the power consumption of those devices. So I do have one UniFi access point powered up here, and I've also got an IP camera from Axis powered up by this device. So very low power usage, that's working just fine. So if I go through some of the other options that we've got here, we can go down to devices that it's found. So you can go off and do scans for different devices that are on the network. You can do Wake on LAN with them as well. But really the bones of the switch here is the configuration. So when you go through the configuration, you can do it per port. You can set different settings on each port, like VLAN, speed control, whether a port has the PoE enabled on it or not, or you just want to leave it automatic, link aggregation groups. So everything's set here. So we can see I've got a mishmash of different options here. I've got a couple of things at just 100 megs, so things like IP cameras, they only need 100 megs, so that's why they're connected. That I've got a couple of things at 1 gig as well, so there's a lot of different things I've got connected. Some have PoE and some don't. Some ports aren't even part of the switch anymore. I VLANed them off for other purposes, which I'll go through in a little while as well. We go down to the PoE options. We can get a chart of the total consumption of all ports together. You can drill that down to just the specific ports if you want to know specifically what's on. I think port 7 has something on it, so we can go check what port 7 is, which I think is the Axis IP camera. So we can start seeing a chart plotted there. So this is good information if you were wanting to see if one of your PoE devices was drawing more power than another. I've had to use this before with a customer where their pan, tilt, and zoom camera kept basically causing the PoE switch to stop sending power, and it was because the motors inside his PoE, in his pan, tilt, and zoom camera were drawing too much power. There was an obstruction in there, and it wasn't able to move, so they had to clean out the inside so the belt wasn't obstructed for it to turn. But this was a good place to sort of try and diagnose it, that it was using very high power consumption if you tried to move it. So this is really good detail, nice graphing that you can get from it as well. So under VLANs here, this might look a little complex to some, but because I've got so many different services in here and I'm trying to keep them separate from each other, I've used some VLANs to separate out some ports so that they're not part of the network. For example, one of the ports on the switch here is my modem into it. So this entire webinar is being broadcast through this unit. So if I powered off the virtual machine running the router on this, I would definitely lose connection to the internet. So here we can see lots of different VLAN options that I've got set, and you can make it as simple or as complex as you like. But if you are mapping services from the NAS through to the switch, you'll generally be involving a VLAN of some kind. Most of the services will do it automatically. So if you're not used to VLANs, you don't know how to use them, don't worry about it. The NAS will generally do most things for you completely automatically, such as setting up our QuWAN, SD-WAN, so software-defined wide area network. That would be done completely automatically for you. I'll just go back to a couple of questions here. So somebody's here asking, can you also see the throughput and bandwidth in the QNAP switch overview? Not in the overview, but you can go down to a per port basis if you want to. So if you come down to the where was it? Sorry. Port statistics here. So when you go to the port statistics, you can see the bytes and things received per port. So you get a live graph view of what's exactly happening on the ports, and you can change it from packets to bytes to, when the errors were happening. So you can get that information there. Hopefully that helps you there, Barbara. Somebody else is also asking questions. That's a lot of questions. I might come to those at the end, Keenan, there for the rest of your questions. If you set VLANs on a network port and the attached Unify device is also granted on the VLAN, will that work correctly? Yes, it will. So VLANs will just get passed through the network layer, no problem, that will work great. So yeah, as we go through some of the other options, we've got things like quality of service and a few other options. And down at the bottom, we've got system information. So the settings for your switch are completely independent from the settings from the NAS side itself. So we can see here, I've got a static IP address set for the switch, which is different from the IP address I'm accessing. So here is the IP for the NAS. 50.181. I've given the switch side of things 50.48, something completely different, which is how you can access them completely individually. So even if you haven't powered up the NAS, the switch will be on so that people's connections can still work. That's all still functioning just fine there in the background as well. So that's really most of the settings with the switch. Some of these settings you will see within the NAS itself. So for example, if you want to do a task that is linked between something the NAS is doing with the switch, you can come in here and create up a virtual switch for that. So in the virtual switch, this does look quite complex because I've got a lot of things running. But if you were to add a virtual switch, if anybody does have a QNAP NAS, you've probably never seen this top option before, which is the Guardian vSwitch mode. So in here, this will allow you to allocate ports from the switch to bond to a service that's running within the QNAP itself. So you can tag up a VLAN ID, come down, select which adapter is going to pair with it. So you can do a lot of settings to customize how you want to set the device up. So we'll jump straight into some of the things that I've got running on this device. So first and foremost, I'll talk about the router side of things. So for the router, I do have a virtual machine running. I do have a separate tutorial video of how to do that on the YouTube channel, and that's for pfSense. So pfSense is a open source enterprise grade firewall project. It's very, very powerful. And you can configure it with very little resources given to it. So I only gave it 1 gig of RAM, and it's not using very much of it at all. If we go look at the interface of this, so there's the sort of setup of the back end of it. If I go into the network, I gave it 2 network adapters, basically virtual switch 2 and virtual switch 1, which we can go and have a look at in the network and virtual switch section. So if I go over there, we've got virtual switch. Let me scroll all the way down. Virtual switch 1 and 2 down here. So virtual switch 2 is what I've allocated the WAN address for, and I gave that a VLAN of 10. Doesn't matter what the VLAN is. That's just me segmenting that port away from the rest of the switch there. So when my WAN input, basically my modem is plugged into this port, I don't want that modem traffic broadcast across the whole switch. I just want it to come to that port, and I've got the NAS set to use that port. So if we go in there and have a look, we can see that I've got adapter 4 created, a virtual adapter with VLAN 10, and that's the one I've allocated into pfSense for the WAN information. So if I come across and have a look at pfSense, so this is the main bit of software that's running my network. You can see the uptime here is just over 10 days. It's been running really rock solid, running my connection. You can see lovely traffic graphs. I've got support here for both IPv4 and IPv6. We can see both connections are online there just fine. We can see the traffic, which is literally just hosting this webinar, so we can see it's using a little bit of upload to send this recording out to you so that you can all see it. It tells you some statistics on the interface, and you can get as complex as you want with this software with intrusion detection. They have lots of packages for you to do that. So if you want to add in different services, there's different options that you can add. So there's a package manager. In the package manager, you can add in lots of different options on there. I've got a couple running on my device. So I'm running Snort, which is effectively the intrusion prevention and detection, IDS or IPS. So I've got that running on there. And there's also PF Blocker NG. For anybody not familiar with PF Blocker, it's very much like Pi-hole, but it's integrated directly into the router software. So you can configure it to block things effectively at the DNS level based off lists. So you get white lists and black lists. So some things are allowed, some things not, and it will do all of that directly in the router for you. And NTO PNG, this is basically NTOP NG. This is a separate application that lets you drill down into a lot more statistics on the connection. So if you want to see which host or like which user on the network is doing what, you can use that for that as well. But in the interfaces, you can assign more than one WAN port if you want. So if you've got a couple of different connections coming in for resilience, you can set those up as well so that you can have both connections working as a load balancer. You can have both connections where one is just a failover. If you're doing VPNs within this software, it supports the AES-NI encryption. So we can see that's set up as active here, and it shows you which crypto options are enabled. So this CPU supports AES-NI, so that's all enabled here. It's working great. So if you are doing things like open VPNs or any VPN connection into your network, you're able to use the hardware accelerated part of the CPU to do that rather than using just raw CPU power. And we can see down here that I gave it quite a lot of disk space. I gave it about 250 gigs. It's using 1%. It's a really lightweight virtual machine. It's not using very much RAM, and the CPU usage is very minimal. This obviously will go up as you enable more and more packages and more features, so that can go up as well. But this is just a really, really powerful piece of firewall routing software that you can set up. And there's a lot of information you can get, and there's a lot of diagnostic information that you can pull as well from the device. So if you ever wanted to see more information on the gateways, how is your connection performing, you can pull that out. If you want to create bonded connections, you can create gateway groups where both gateways either have the same tier so that it will load balance, or you can separate it out. But it's a very, very powerful bit of software, and it's very quick to install on the QNAP. Anybody that wants to take advantage of this software, by all means, go to our YouTube channel. We do have a video that was put up there in the last couple of weeks if anybody wants to see how that works. Another feature that I've got added in, so if you are a small office, you maybe need to have a telephone exchange set up. So another virtual machine I've got added here is something called FreePBX. That's from a company called Sangoma. So coming over here to FreePBX, I basically gave it one LAN port from the switch. And within here, I've got the connection set up so that we can do phone calls. I've got different users set up in here so that we can have phone calls to each other. Currently, I've just got the one user online, which just so happens to be myself, so I can pull that in right here. So here I've got contacts. I can have different users connected in. So this is all online. So SIP 5000, I'm extension 5000 on 50.172, which is the FreePBX running inside the NAS. And I can make phone calls. So if I wanted to call my colleague Tom, he's not there right now. So that's telling me it's got a voicemail there. So it's not going to work. He's not signed in. So I've been given his voicemail. If I want to see my call activity, I can log into that. So if I go to the user control panel, that's going to log in here, and it's going to show right then I did an outgoing call to my colleague Tom Jeps. It was only 3 seconds. I hung up halfway through the voicemail message. I can see a voicemail left by my other colleague Tam there, so he left me a voicemail. I can log in and listen to what the voice message was, download that file, forward it on to anybody else. But you get some really good information here, and you can add to this dashboard as well. If you want the dashboard to look a little differently, like when people were on Do Not Disturb or anything like that, you can just add the item to the dashboard. So if I want to be a Do Not Disturb, I can enable that directly from the control panel. If my soft phone or my physical VoIP phone doesn't support those features, you can enable those features from here. But it's a very feature-filled, powerful software, FreePBX. And as the name of it implies, it is completely free. So this is a full telephone extension, telephone exchange, running directly inside the NAS. And if we go back to the interface there to have a look at it, we can see it's not using very much resource. Again, I've only got 3 users added to it, but it's still a very lightweight application. It can be run inside the NAS. This NAS only has 8 gig of RAM, and I'm only allocating 3 gigs of it to sort of extracurricular activities for the NAS to do, as well as running itself. With these options here. So if I go through some other options, you can admin it out. So if you wanted to go down to the users, we can see I've got the users there. So I've given us all extension numbers. There's our names, you know, the extensions we've given. You can use it with SIFChan or legacy chat as well. So if you've got different options that you want to do within the PBX manager, you can do ChanZip or PJSIP. So there's 2 different options. I did everybody through the ChanZip option, and you can change literally every setting that you want. It's a very cool bit of software. If you are looking for a PBX solution, having this running on the NAS, it really doesn't tax the NAS very much at all, and is a really, really good bit of software for doing anything that you'd need to do with a PBX. And there's a lot of modules you can do. There are paid options if you do want to have some advanced features or extra functions within it. You can pay for some extra features if the standard ones aren't there, but to be honest, the standard ones are pretty good. And you can see for this one, absolutely rock solid. This has been running for just over 2 weeks now, this software. Absolutely rock solid, no problems at all. It's a really good bit of software, and installation is also very easy. I'll be doing a video on how to install and set up FreePBX for the YouTube channel a bit later on as well. Got a question here from Geo saying QuWAN and pfSense do have overlap, right? Or is QuWAN needed? So what Geo's saying there is that QuWAN and pfSense kind of overlap in their feature set, because effectively both are like routers. That's true, but we've got some different options in there that I'll show you in a minute. So we'll move on to QuWAN in a second, Geo, just to cover off the options there. So what Geo's saying there is effectively correct. Effectively, pfSense and QuWAN are both routers. So it's probably more applicable if I show you what the QuWAN software looks like. So on this, on the NAS side of things here, I have installed our QuWAN agent, and I've configured it up in a way that's going to allow one port from the switch to effectively be where the internet is for the QuWAN. So that's how this new network, this SD-WAN network, is connecting to other SD-WAN devices in my organization. So we can see here that QuWAN port 1 is enabled, and I've used physical port switch port 12 to do that. So that's the port over there. It's highlighted in blue on the back. Now, if I scroll down, the rest of these are off. If I go all the way to the bottom, we can see that the last port is enabled, and this one is allocated as a LAN. So what this is saying, as I've only allocated one port, if I was to plug something into physical port 14 on the switch, anything plugged into that is now not part of my local LAN here with my home machines and printers and devices that I have here. Anything plugged into port 14 is now a member of the wider area network, the SD-WAN group with other devices in your SD-WAN organization. So to give you a picture of what that looks like, we have a very nice tool called QuWAN Orchestrator. So here's a quick demo network we've set up here at QNAP UK. So we can see different devices connected. Some are set up as hubs, so they've got public IP addresses so that other devices can come in and hub through those. The two hubs can talk to each other, so you can see in the topology there that our two QUK hubs here, they're connected to each other, and then off each one we have the edge devices. So I've got one of my older NAS here, the 882T connected. I've got this QGD-3014 connected. So they're all connected, but anything connected to this hub, so for example, if I wanted the users on the back of the Guardian device here to talk to the users off the back of the QUK Site 4, that's exactly what they can do. They're actually all part of the exact same network. But anything plugged into anything other than port 14 on my QNAP, they are not part of this group. So my home devices, media streaming, things like that, they're not going through this link. Only the devices that are connected off that specific port, or I could add more ports if I wanted to. If I had several devices issued to me by my company that I wanted to be part of the network, perhaps they have a printer that's connected through it, a voice over IP phone that only works through the link, access to certain bits of software that they have, everything can be done through the QWAN orchestrator here. So you can see different devices connected. And if I go down to the topology settings, this is where you get a better view of how things are connected. So you can see all the different items. You get a bit more information about what the devices are. So we've got quite a few of our Qvr-301W Wi-Fi access points here. And anything that just says QNAP device is usually just a NAS with this software that's running on it. It's a lightweight VM that only gets 1 gig of RAM allocated to it. I've only given it 2 CPU cores, so it's a very lightweight item. And you can move devices between different organizations and sites. So there's an option over here on the right, so you can remove a device from a region. So if I wanted to move my 882T from QUK demo to QUK lab, it's very easy to do that. You can remove it from the region, so there it is just on its own, and then you can go in and configure it so that you want this to go to a different option. So I want this to be in the lab, let's say, and you can click save. So that's now going to move that device down into the lab. So now they're connected off to a different location, so we can see the organization has changed. I've set the preferences as to which hub is the best one for that user to connect into. So whilst this, back to Gio's question, whilst QWAN is effectively similar to what pfSense can do, doing it in pfSense isn't necessarily very simple, very easy to do. With QWAN Orchestrator, if you've got QNAP devices everywhere, it just makes life so much easier, and you get this nice central control panel to control everything. So everything that we make generally these days can use QWAN. Quite often, all you need is a capability to run virtualization stations. So that would be anything with an Intel or an AMD CPU, and ideally with at least 4 gig of RAM in the NAS itself. You will be able to add that device into a QWAN organization so that multiple sites are all connected securely. All of these lines that you're seeing here are effectively VPN tunnels between all the devices. So if QUK site over here wants to talk to QUK site 4 over there, it's effectively going through the hub with a VPN link, through the hub to a VPN link to another hub, out to the device. And in reality, this Craig-882T and this QGD-3014-16PT, there's only about 6 feet between them, but I've now effectively mapped those through Swindon so that they're not talking to each other on the same network now. They're effectively talking to each other through the remote network. So it's a very easy way to set up multiple site links. If you have users working from home, especially in this sort of time we're in now, this is a really good way to connect them in. And you don't have to have a VPN connection on every device you send home with that employee. If you want to give them a VoIP phone, a laptop, a printer, and they all need to be connected back to the head office, well, you could just put there at the top of that something like a QNAP NAS, this device here, or one of our Wi-Fi routers or access points. you could have one of those in the network that does all of that connection for them, and any device plugged in the back of that that QNAP device can then be connected off to the main network as well. So it's a very cool bit of software, and it's completely free. If you've got a QNAP, it's completely free to use it. You just need at least 2 QNAP devices. One of them must be connected with a public IP address so that you can connect one as a hub. But that's effectively our QuWAN orchestrator. So if anybody does have any questions on how that works, please let me know as well. Got some extra questions here. I hope you will also release power over Ethernet access points so I can ditch UniFi altogether and switch across. Thanks very much. Right now, I don't think we've got any PoE access points coming, but on the subject of UniFi, we'll go through that option next. So I also have a UniFi controller running inside this device. So it's not running here, so I haven't allocated it a full-blown virtual machine to do it. I could, of course, do that. I could install something like an Ubuntu virtual machine there and have all manner of services running on it. You know, I could have websites running on it, a UniFi controller in there as well, and all sorts. But what I've done with that is I've actually done that in Container Station. So I come across here to Container Station. I've got a running Docker container here, which is a UniFi controller, effectively pre-built UniFi controller. I've changed the passwords and things. So that's running inside this NAS, and that's what I've got running over here. So this is a UniFi controller hosted off the exact same NAS. So you can get all your usual things, your dashboards, things that are working just fine. If you go into your device list, you can see all the different devices that are connected. So while Geo wants to get off UniFi, I'm pretty well invested in UniFi here at home. So I've got a lot of different devices that are connected in through that system. So all of my UniFi devices are all completely centrally managed here in one interface. And this is just run as a very lightweight Docker container hosted directly within the QNAP Guardian. All things like logging and stuff like that, that's all happening direct into the QNAP. So you can do a lot of functionality with it. So that's UniFi running directly inside the device. So there's not much more to say. It's UniFi software. It works with their access points. There are other manufacturers out there of devices where you can host your own equipment like that. I think TP-Link make an Omada network that has a similar sort of idea where you can host your own controller. That would also work in the exact same way. You could install one of those setups. So it's a very easy way to get things set up here with the different options. Now, on top of all these different things that I've got, I do also have our new Qvr Elite software running on this. So this is a bit like Qvr Pro. It's just more subscription-based for licensing instead of perpetual, but it's much more efficient at running the cameras. Now, a cool feature of running our surveillance software on one of our Guardian units is because the Guardian unit is integrated with the PoE, and you might want to control that information. If I go into the camera settings, so I've got 2 cameras that are added, we can see over here that I got one of the cameras actually powered up directly from the PoE switch that's next to me here. So I can actually control power on and off for that camera directly within the camera software. So I don't have to go log into the switch interface to do that. I can do everything completely from within the surveillance software. So if I feel that camera's having a bit of trouble, maybe the camera's crashed or something, and I want to power cycle it for whatever reason, I can do that from here. I don't have to log into the camera interface and tell it to restart. Maybe the web interface isn't responding. I can do it right from here because it is connected directly into the switch. As my other camera is quite far away and nowhere near this Guardian unit, I'm not able to connect it in to control that one. So it just says I can't control the PoE for that device. So that's held somewhere else. So to access the cameras, it's the exact same software that you would use for accessing Qvr Pro. It just connects in differently if you're using Qvr Elite as your server instead of Qvr Pro. So if I was to log into that, I can slide that in here to the main screen. So here's the Qvr Pro client. So we can see here I've got the cameras connected. So I've got just the standard office camera, so that's this one, and I've also got a back garden camera, or I've got the view for all of them. Now, this top camera is the one that's connected into my office. Sorry for the horrible picture. It's literally mounted in a window, looking out the window here, not mounted outside. But that's the main camera that I've got there. And at any point, I can go back in time to some different footage. I can click one camera, go back to a different time, and go see what was happening, while it was dark, let's say. Oh, there's a cobweb on the lens. So I can go back and see different items. So this has been running now for quite a while. So if I open up the interface software here, we can go back and see how far back I've got footage. So if I go back to February, it looks like I set this up on the 19th of February there, and that's been running this entire time since then, recording these two cameras. So I can go back to any point in time to that day. So we're looking at a different day's footage, let's say, and we can scroll back through the timeline for that day's footage and go and see it. So it's very, very powerful software. So to run through the list of things that I've got running on this device is I've got pfSense doing the routing for my entire house. It's the firewall for my entire home network here that I've got set up. I've also got the QWAN orchestrator enabled, the QWAN agent, which is linking certain ports off the back of my NAS into the demo network that we have. So if I want to connect into the demo network of different devices we have at the office, it's very easy. I can just change which port my laptop is plugged into. So it's very, very convenient to do that. I'm also running FreePBX. So I've got a telephone system, a full-blown telephone system running inside my FreePBX within my QNAP Guardian there. So it's very, very powerful feature there to be able to run telephones for an entire office from one device. And to protect all this different set of services that I'm running on the device, I've also got it backed up with a UPS. So I've got a UPS connected into it just to make it backed up. So as everything's in one device, as from Tom's slides that you saw earlier, if you have lots of separate devices, it's number one, it's harder to manage. You've got to log into lots of separate things to manage each specific device. So if you wanted to configure VLANs, you might have to open up the config pages on a couple of separate things to do that. And that also uses a lot more power. So if you wanted to be able to have a battery backup system to keep the security running, your telephone system running, the cameras running, the recording NVR running, for example, these are all things that you would probably want to keep running in the event of a power failure. So that's what I've got enabled here. So if you were to go into the control panel for the device and go to external devices, we can see down here I've got the UPS connected. So I've got it connected with a network connection. And it's not a massive UPS 2200, and it's going to power up this entire setup. This is powering up effectively my entire home office, not just the Guardian. So it's powering up my laptop, a couple of screens, modems. I've got another test NAS. I've got a TVS H1288X turned on in here as well. So there's a lot of different devices all powered up by this. So if it was literally just powering the Guardian, this would jump up to just over 3 hours, so that you would have a lot of protection there for all your essential services. And the best thing about keeping the Guardian powered up is things like VoIP phones and cameras. They're all PoE powered. So long as the QNAP is running, so are all your devices. So you can get all the recording done directly. Your phone system would still work. If you plug in your modem into that UPS as well, you're not going to go offline when the power fails. So it's a really good way to keep everything powered up quite efficiently. Just to illustrate how I've got this unit set up as well. So we've got in this unit, I've got a couple of SSDs. So I've just got some fairly simple basic SSDs, and I've got a couple of hard drives added into there as well. So I've got some WD 4 terabyte drives and just a couple of basic SSDs. And that's how it's set up. And there is a couple of M.2 slots inside the unit as well, which I've left empty. I'm not using those. So I'm running all this on this NAS, and to give you an overview of sort of the workload it's being put through, I'm using a fair bit of the RAM, just simply because I've got so many services running. As somebody pointed out in the questions, you're not likely to have probably QWAN orchestrator running and pfSense. So there's probably not a situation you'd have all the services running that I'm running, but the 8 gig of RAM goes a really long way for running a lot of services that you have. If you do have some point of sale devices that are doing things like credit card transactions or storing lists of barcodes or things for your shop, powering up tills, things like that, there's still quite a bit of resource left over there for you to go and use different functions. The CPU's not really been used. Once it's booted up and all the services are running, the CPU's staying usually quite low there, below 40% anyway. So it's a really efficient way to get the most out of your device, running so many services in a single unit. And very important, if you get a UPS backup for that. And whilst we're showing here the desktop device, this is obviously very suitable for the camera recording side of things if you want a good retention, because you can put up to 4 18-terabyte drives in there for a lot of capacity for that function. If recording the cameras for not as long, the rack mount versions would also be very suitable for it. The functionality between them is largely the same. The QGD-1602, it supports a lot more RAM than all the other units that we've got. We've got the original one, the QGD-1600P, that supports up to 60 watts per port on 4 of the ports. So depending on your requirements, we've got a lot of different units. This unit's been sat on my desk now probably for about 3 weeks. It's practically silent with 4 drives added in there. It's really not something that's added any noise into my home office setup here. So it's a very quiet unit. Not the same, you couldn't say the same for the rack mount unit. So if you are looking for a really quiet unit, this one is perfect, and it's small enough that it would fit inside something like a comms cabinet mounted on the wall in an office. If you had a little shelf in there, it would be a very good place to put such a thing, and you could get a small little UPS to go with it just to keep it powered up, because the power consumption is quite low of it as well. Okay, it's got Gio saying, looks like Gio's got the QGD-1602P, and he's got the TL400R 4-slot rack mount. So it sounds like he's got the TR-400U 4-bay expansion. So he makes a good point that if you do still want to use more capacity for things like surveillance on the rack mount ones that only support 2.5-inch drives, you can attach another 1U device right next to it for 4 3.5-inch bays as well on those if you want it. So that's a very good addition there. Thank you, Gio. Okay. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover off there. I'm just going to go back to the questions. I remember that there was somebody with quite a lot of questions. Let me go find those just so that I can go through. Let me find Keenan's set of questions there just so that I can answer them all. So my next set of questions are in regards to the creation of LAN virtual switch to connect adapter 2 of the virtual machine for pfSense. Okay. If a host port was used to create the WAN side virtual switch, will this LAN side virtual switch need to be connected to the QTS and QSS adapters 5 and 6? So if you wanted to connect the WAN side directly into one of the host ports, you wouldn't need one of the Guardian switches or to do VLANs or anything like that. It would effectively be isolated. So yes, you could use the host side. And it doesn't matter which sort of structure you set up for sending the switch. If you want to use both host ports for, say, the WAN and LAN side of pfSense, you can do that. There is 2 internal LAN connections between the 2. So if I was to go back to the virtual switch view, I think there was a screen that shows that. So let me pull that up. There you go. So in the background here, you can see these smaller green ones in the back of the unit. So while there's 2 host ports at the top and then you've got your 16 switch ports down here, there is 2 connections directly linking QTS and QUNet switch. So you can effectively do virtual switch bridging there as well. So if you still wanted to be able to access the NAS or pretty much sort of add extra ports to the NAS side of things, you can do that with virtual switches as well if you wanted to there, Keenan. But that would be a way you do that. But in how I've set up the virtual switches down here, so we can see the options that I've got mounted here. So virtual switch 2, which is my WAN port for pfSense. I've got that set up down there with the VLAN of 10. Whereas my pfSense virtual adapter 2 is just a standard virtual switch. It's not a Guardian switch or anything like that. There's no VLANs set on this. I'm using this same virtual switch for a few other things. It's used for a lot of the QWAN functions. I've used the same virtual switch for things like FreePBX as well. So it's used for both pfSense, Unify, container that I've got running, and also the QuWAN orchestrator. So it was a multi-function virtual switch there, if you like, for everything I've done there with that setup. So the virtual switches can look a little scary when you first get into them, but follow the wizards and you really can't go wrong. Quite often setting up the wizards, when you do the wizards for pfSense on a normal NAS that's not a Guardian, it is really just next through the settings. If you go look at the YouTube video we've got on setting up pfSense, you can see me setting it up from scratch. There's no cuts or fast forward sections in that video. It's set up in real time, and you can see all the steps I go through from having absolutely nothing set up to how I get it set up with the virtual switches. Hopefully that helped you out there, Keenan. Okay. See if there's any other questions. I'll come back to you, Gio, on whether or not we are planning to do some power over Ethernet access points so that you can ditch all your Unify gear. So we'll keep the session open for a couple more minutes to see if anybody else has any other questions. If anybody missed the start of this session, we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel later as well, so that you can get to rewatch it there if you need to catch the start again. Okay, so I see a question from William. I use a lot of QNAP gear. Can I use this to connect all of my servers? Absolutely, you can. Surprisingly, I also have quite a lot of QNAP gear. I'm not connecting everything through the Guardian simply because I think pretty much straight after this session, this QNAP Guardian is getting put in a box and being sent off to somebody else to test it out. But yes, you could absolutely do that. If you wanted faster connections like 10 gig, we also do a range of just plain old switches. We've got them managed switches. So the interface is very much like what I just showed here, but the side benefit is everything is much faster. So instead of 1 gig or 2.5 gig like some of the Guardians, it's 10 gig switching is an option as well. You have 150 GPS. Is that gigabits a second? Is that an internet speed connection? Is that what does that relate to there, William? Up and downstream on your internet. Okay, so if you've got 150 gigabits per second, then yes, you're going to need something that can route obviously faster than a gigabit. So if you're looking for something to do routing on anything faster than 1 gig, what I would recommend is our QvR unit. So we've got the QvR-301W. Sorry if I spell it right. Let's pull that up here. I think I might have it turned on my network here. Or maybe I don't. Or I might have changed its IP address, knowing me. Is it 251 now? Ah, there we go. It's always the case. So if I change it to admin, and remember what password I set for it now. There we go. So this is our QvR device. So if you're looking for something that can route 150 gigs, so what you can do with this one is in the network settings for the WAN port. You've got 2 10 gig ports on this device. So on the back, you've got your 4 1 gigs. I currently have the blue one set as one of the 1 gig LAN ports, but you can change that around if you want to. So you've got over here the port definition, and at the top, you've got your WAN port configuration. So you can set it to be the WAN port on the 10 gig Ethernet port. And so long as you're not using it for, let's say, IPsec VPN or anything like that, we can do routing and firewall throughput at 9.9 gigabits a second, according to the product manager. He's got a nice little chart that I've seen that shows 9.9 gigabits per second throughput. So your 150 gigabits a second should work well for the 10 gig connection that we've got there. So if you're looking for something that can route at speeds like that, that would be definitely an option that you could look at, this QvR-301W. This also does the QuWAN side of things as well. But because I don't have the WAN port of my QvR connected, I have it connected so that the Guardian can be my internet connection for this webinar right now. So that's why this wasn't online. Somebody's saying, would it be also possible to use a 10 gig add-on card and run QuWAN on that interface? Not on this particular unit, but if you've got the QGD-1602, yes, you could do it on that one. No problem whatsoever, but this unit does not have an option for that, unfortunately. I will send you an email after the session there, William. If you've got any other questions, let me know. Yes, Gio, if you wanted to use a 10 gig card in literally any QNAP that has a PCI Express slot and allocate that specific port for the QuWAN WAN interface, by all means, you can use that for 10 gig connections. Obviously, make sure that QNAP is a fairly high spec, something with a quad-core Celeron CPU, you might be cutting it fine on being able to route at full 10 gig speeds. But yeah, I've tested it with I don't really have the mid-range option available to me. I've tested QuWAN throughput through on a TVS-H1288X, which has 10 gig built in. I was just routing through my internet from the device. I was sort of behind the device to my main LAN network to do the speed test, but it would go at full 10 gig, no problem. But it's a 12-core Xeon, of course it will. It's very powerful. So it does depend on the unit, but there is obviously not a 12-core Xeon in something like the Qvr 301W. So yeah, size your processor correctly enough. Routing is not a free thing. You know, if you're routing at very high speeds, it uses some resources, usually CPU. So make sure your CPU is quick enough. Will QNAP add petabyte data storage in the future? We've already got it, William. So yeah, you can add expansion chassis to existing QNAPs. Obviously, with the 18 terabyte drives that are available today, you can go up to quite a large size. I think the last I calculated it to, with 16 expansion chassis with a 24 bay head unit, I think it was something like 5.2 petabytes at this stage. So yes, and you can have single volumes up to 1 petabyte each. Okay, I think we're going to end it there. So if anybody does have any questions or we couldn't fit them in here, please do email us at uksales@qnap.com. Thanks, Tom, for the introduction at the start. So yeah, if anybody does need to have a recap of this or see any more of the session, it will be up on the YouTube channel a bit later on. So I think we're going to end it there. Thanks a lot for attending, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.